Most people believe the Israel-Palestine conflict began in 1948. Most people believe Nazi history ended in 1945. But what if those two stories are connected in ways almost nobody talks about? Today's guest spent years digging through archives in Germany, Israel, and Europe, uncovering documents that reveal a largely forgotten alliance between Nazi leadership and Arab leaders, including the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. His research was so significant that after reading his book, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu personally wrote to him. Joining me is researcher and author Abbas Maldahiyar. Abbas, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I'm really glad to be on your show. And I'm looking forward to uncover a lot of things with you.
Likewise. Many people think that Nazi ideology and the Middle East were completely separate. What evidence shows that they were actually connected?
Yes, that's very true. In fact, many times, see, when we look for the Arab-Israel conflict, often it is portrayed that it is a conflict between the colonialist and the anti-colonial forces. Palestinians are always perceived as they are fighting an anti-colonial fight, and Israelis are the colonialists. And this just happened because the Palestinian leadership did not face the trial as the Nazis faced post-World War. And whatever they did, everything got wrapped under the carpet. It was pushed under the carpet and it never opened up. It's very fascinating, Daniel, because my journey in this subject began with a very different point of view. I began to look into the Indian connections with the Nazis. Now, people may get curious that when I'm using the word Indian because it had to do with a philosophy called Hindutva. And it was in 2019 when the government, Narendra Modi government again came in power. And Imran Khan, the former prime minister of Pakistan, put a tweet that a fascist Nazi sympathizing government or those who see their ideology to be linked with them have come into the power. And I became curious that, okay, fine, let me dig in through. And of course, the first articles and the op-eds which I came through was from the usual suspects like Washington Post, etc., etc. And I could find that there are op-eds which are talking about the connection between Hindutva and the Nazism and the fascism. They were talking about the circumstantial evidences because one of the leaders had literally gone to meet the fascist. There were some works of, say, the works of the Golwalkar, which spoke a bit on those lines. But the more and more I dug, I found that there was nothing of scale to even 1% of what Nazis did was replicated by the Hindutva forces. But the evidences began to pop up very diametrically opposite in a diametrically opposite direction. What I observed that it was the Islamist fraction which was aligning with the Nazis in during the World War II, and the alliance was so deep. This was so deeply rooted that they even went on to see Hitler as second prophet. Now, this was an alarming situation for me because in Islam, you can't see anybody as prophet apart from the Prophet Muhammad. He's the seal, the prophet. He's the final prophet. And then when something like that happened, that somebody is seen as a prophet, it was quite a curious case to inspect more into because the evidences which began to came further, they were even more startling because I could find that the Arab leadership was trying to replicate exactly what Nazis were doing in the they wanted to replicate it thoroughly. And the evidences come in form of the archives. I went through the archival documents through Israel, through United States. So we have a lot of evidences which speak about the collaboration between the Nazis and the Islamists. And that is clearly spoken by the archives themselves. We did not dig into the op-eds like we had the op-eds talking about the connection between the Hindutva and the Nazis. But here I had a direct archives coming out from the Nuremberg trial, coming out from the office correspondences between the foreign office of the Germans, as in the Nazis, and the Palestinian and the Arab leadership. And those evidences very clearly show that there was a very strong connection between the two fractions. And perhaps one strongest reason which tied them together was the hatred for the Jews, and hatred which was absolutely on the par to see the annihilation. That was the ultimate goal. Yeah.
So, what surprised you most when you started to uncover these connections?
So one of the most surprising thing, which I already stated, Daniel, was see, there are two fractions in Islam. One is the Shiite Islam, and other is the Sunni Islam. For the Shiite Islam, there's a concept of the Imams, and Ali is considered as one of the important most character. And according to the Sunnis, it's the Prophet Muhammad, and it is a different caliphate altogether. Now, for the Sunnis, the Arab Sunnis largely, Hitler was like a prophet. And I uncovered a few very fascinating things. Like there was a very famous song on the streets of Aleppo, Damascus, etc. And the song was like, in the heaven we have Allah, on the earth we have Hitler. So this, and the moment I began to uncover this, I was like, oh my God, like in Islam, it is absolute kufr to see that there is a prophet beyond the Prophet Muhammad. There cannot be no prophet after him. And here they were ready to hail somebody as prophet in the 20th century. That's Adolf Hitler. And that really took me off. And I was like, I need to dig deeper. And the more and more I began to dig, the more surprises were waiting me.
So, how significant was Haj Amin al Husseini's relationship with Hitler?
So Hajal Hazamin al Husseini is I would say he's a very fascinating character too. Of course, he's dead evil. There's no doubt about it. He was one of the most evil person who lived in that era. But he is fascinating because he took the position of a Mufti, and Mufti is a position which is designated for somebody who is an expert of the Islamic theology. And in fact, he did not finish his studies in Islamic theology too, but he was brought into the position of the Mufti through Samuel Herbert. He was a British Jew officer, and he saw that perhaps he can be one of the most liberal man who can really take care of the Arab disturbances which are appearing. But fortunately or unfortunately, the things really did not go the way Samuel Herbert thought it to go. It came to happen diametrically opposite, and he is the one who led a lot of anti-Semitic, or rather anti-Jewish acts in Palestine. Very famous, the riots of Hebron, which is known, where a lot of Jews were massacred. Before that, also 1922. Before that, 1921, right when he became the Grand Mufti. And interestingly, there was no such designation called Grand Mufti. The designation was Mufti. But a designation was created so that he could become more and more powerful. The hope was that he will end up becoming one of the most liberal person. Now, because you asked about his relationship with Hitler, see, he did not meet Hitler till 1941. He had been attempting to do so right from the period when Hitler had came into the power, which is in 1933. But eventually, the meeting would happen in 1941. Before that, also, he had been praising the Nazis. He had been seeing a great ally among the Nazis, because they both catered to the common purpose. The common purpose was to get rid of the Jews entirely. And after the 1936-39 revolt, which occurred, the revolt against the British began to chase him, and he went and went, and it was the Fahud of 1941 in Iraq. It is actually a coup which had happened, and which failed. The coup was planned against the government, and for that coup, the Nazis had supplied arms in number of, say, 1,500 light machine guns, some 3,000 bazookas, and there were a lot of ammunitions which were supplied for the coup to happen. But because timing got wrong and a thing happened, the coup failed. But when the coup failed, all the artilleries, etc., which was brought in or got in, it was used against the Jews, and a big massacre of the Jews happened. And it can be said that Farhud was one of the attempts to bring exactly what was happening in Germany or Eastern Europe into the Arabian world. And the program was done. The Jews were killed. And in fact, sexual violence was also at its peak during the Farhud. And after that, after having facilitated this genocide and the massacre with Al-Gilani, Osman, Grand Mufti, travels and reaches Berlin. And then he gets to meet Hitler in 1941. And when this meeting happened, not much transpired between two of them, I would say. Of course, this meeting was quite important because he was meeting Hitler for the first time. But largely, the discussion was around what should be the plan for getting independence for the Arab. But Hitler still did not commit on the paper. Grand Mufti insisted that you should put it on paper in writing. But Hitler goes on to say that my words are way more weightier than anything what I write to you. So take my word as a promise and it will happen. I will support you in the cause. But of course, there was some intimate exchange between the two in terms of the cause of being anti-Jewish. Before that, Hitler, Grand Mufti had already met other officials of Nazis, and few testimonies tells us that he was surely knowing that the Holocaust is happening, the final solution, as we call. He was quite aware of about it, and in fact, he blocked the migration of the Jewish children from the Eastern Europe, where the concentration camps existed, and he ensured that they get massacred and they get killed. There's a long list of war crimes which this man had done. And it's unfortunate that he could not be tried as a war criminal and he went scot free because after the World War, he went to France. It is said that he was kept in house arrest or something, but he lived a very luxurious life. He was having chauffeur driven cars. He was having a lot of stuff in a big mansion where he was kept as under the house arrest. He later on went to Cairo, Egypt, and then and finally in the Libya is when he dies. And he was living among within us till 5 decades ago. So it's quite unfortunate that he could not be tried.
Around 10 years ago, Bibi Netanyahu spoke about him in a speech, right? And he said that Hitler did not want to actually exterminate the Jews. He wanted to expel the Jews. Husseini convinced him to kill the Jews because they may migrate to Palestine. Or maybe speak a little bit about that.
Yes, you are posing a very important question, Daniel, because see, Mr. Netanyahu made this claim 10 years ago in 2015. And he made this claim right before his trip to Germany. And when he said so, the German government came up front and said that, oh, don't say this. It's wrong what Mr. Netanyahu is claiming because it's all what we did. Don't say this to the poor Palestinians. And so that's how the narrative happened. And a lot of condemnation happened in BBC and many other places. And the whole world had almost got against Mr. Netanyahu. But there are two things to note. One is that the intent. Second thing is what actually transpired. When I talk of the intent, there is no doubt that this man, as in Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, was all sure to do something exactly on the scale of Holocaust in the Palestine against the Jews. He was surely planning to do so, or bring the extermination of the Jews into the Arab world. He was definitely up for it. And when he facilitated this and led this, the Farhud, which happened in 1941 in Iraq, this was exactly the what would have magnified to become what Holocaust happened in the European world, the Germany. Now, there's some very interesting cases. Like in 1944, when the Nazis have almost weakened and there's some logistical challenges to them. Despite that, this man, Grand Mufti, is insisting them to bomb Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And he does it thrice. And Nazis tell thrice that we cannot do it because logistically it is not possible. So this gives you further hints, or rather makes you believe that intent of this man was way more evilish than that of the Nazis. And of course, you can't compare the two evils because at times evils are evils. But having said so, it's really important to understand that while the Nazis were like the professional soldiers who believed in what is pragmatic in a battle, what needs to be done, the battle needs to be fought with pragmatism. It's not just fought with the emotion. But this man, Grand Mufti, was driven more by the emotion. He was more driven by what his theology dictated him. That makes a case more stronger from the Grand Mufti to be the person who perhaps would have even given some ignition for the Holocaust to happen, because we have testimony in the Nuremberg trial where it said that he was in constant touch with Eichmann, and not entirely with Himmler, but certainly he was in touch with Eichmann, and they were discussing the final solution. And now this word final solution is quite catchy because, see, the word final solution has been in business from quite long. And whether it's the Tsarist Russia we talk about, or the mid ages Europe. So there was always a thing called final solution. Nobody knew that what final solution is. No one spoke about that what the final solution would be. Hitler came up with a method, what he did in the Holocaust. But final solution always meant that what exactly one wants to achieve through the journey, the final destination. And for the Grand Mufti, who was completely believing in the theology, which is the Hadith, and the Hadith says that judgment day cannot arrive without the annihilation of the Jews or exterminating the Jews entirely. And it says that on the judgment day, behind the tree and a stone or rock, the Jew would be hiding, and the stone slash rock and the tree would call out and say that, hey, here is the Jew, come and kill him. So when the theology is so strong, and uh, and somebody who believes so strongly in it, and that's what goes with the Islamist world, they're too deeply entrenched into the theology. So I'm quite convinced to some extent with what Prime Minister Netanyahu said. Maybe that we will never arrive at uh, the exact result, that what exactly he would have done, what would have happened, because he was never tried as a war criminal. Perhaps if that would have happened, this problem would have been sorted.
I was listening to a lecture by an Israeli expert. His name is Dr. Mordechai Kedar, and he said that he was once in a museum in Europe, and he was reading through the guest book, and somebody wrote in Arabic that Hitler should be cursed, not because of what he did, but because he didn't finish the job. Now, from your research, how widespread was the admiration and love for Hitler in parts of the Arab world?
So I'm sure people would have heard about the Muslim Brotherhood, and Muslim Brotherhood was and Hamas is nothing but the offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. It was established in Palestine as an extension. Now, the Hassan al-Banna was the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, and we have the evidence that after the World War was over and this man returned as in the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, al-Banna organized a grand reception for the Grand Mufti, and this reception was given as if he was a war hero or something like that. And in fact, he said that now that the Nazis are gone, this is the man who is going to finish the purpose. As in, what was the purpose? If the Nazis are gone, and he's talking about a purpose which is left unfinished. So it was the extension of the Nazism, which exactly he was talking about. And I'm not surprised with what you observed or what you read, but rather what you heard through the scholar, because we have this evidence very clearly when al-Banna welcomed al-Husseini and he said that the unfinished job of the Nazis will get over. It will be done. And just circling back, once upon a time, Arab world was praising Hitler, saying that he has come to finish the unfinished job of the Prophet. So you see the vicious cycle, right? Once after the Prophet, they saw Hitler as being the one. And after Hitler, now they are saying that the Grand Mufti, Husseini, who's going to finish the task. So I'm very sure that the scholar was very right what he observed. And those sentiments definitely exist among the people. It's very strong.
When the Israeli Defense Forces, the soldiers were going through Gaza, they found Mein Kampf, Hitler's book in Arabic, in almost every home that they went into. And they were shocked, but our conversation kind of explains why that book would be so, cherished in their homes.
And in fact, I can quote al-Banna over here. What he wrote was, so see, I'm just quoting, I mentioned it already in my book, but I will just quote for the people so that they can just get the sense of what I'm trying to talk about. So he says that Hitler's and Mussolini's defeat did not frighten you. Your hair did not turn gray of fright. And you are still full of life and fright. What a hero, what a miracle of man. We wish to know what the Arab youth, cabinet ministers, men, and princes of Palestine, Syria, Iraq, Tunis, Morocco, and Tripoli are going to do be worthy of this hero. Yes, this hero who challenged an empire and fought Zionism with the help of Hitler and Germany. Germany and Hitler are gone, but Amin al-Husseini will continue the struggle. This is what al-Banna states, and I'm quoting verbatim. So now, doesn't this statement makes the case very clear that what was unfinished in the Islamic world was taken over by Hitler, and what was left over by Hitler was destined to be taken over by
the leadership of the Palestine. And perhaps that is exactly what Hamas is doing today.
Yes. Speak a little bit about the Muslim units that were fighting inside the Nazi military. I think most people don't know about that. What do we know about that?
Well, see, there were two basic now, and Grand Mufti was a person who was very actively recruiting the Muslim units, and there were two major units which existed, and the two major units were the 13th Waffen Mountain Division, and one of them was 23rd Waffen Mountain Division of SS. Now, these two units were actively mobilized and activated by this man, Grand Mufti himself, and it was formed in 1943, 42, 43, if I'm not wrong. I don't remember the exact year, but it was 44 43, something like that. It includes, and there were three sentiments which were brewed in the minds of the Bosnian Muslims. They were the Bosnian Muslims, and the three sentiments was, one sentiment was that you have to fight against the Bolsheviks, you have to fight against the Brits, and of course you have to fight against the Jews, because the Jews are the one who lead to the Bolshevism, and so this battle is very important, and this is equivalent to jihad. And this is important to note that jihad was again incited here. We find these cases multiple times when the Islamic invaders came in Hindustan, India. Whenever Islamic invaders went, wherever they went, they always invoked jihad when the battle was against the non-Muslims. And why I'm bringing this up is because a lot of apologists would say that the Muslims were fighting the Muslims too. So what is this point of the jihad? It plays no role. But the point to be noted is jihad was invoked only when the battle was against the non-Muslims. It was always the case. And very interesting thing which needs to be noted about these two divisions is that they celebrated Ramadan or Ramazan very, very well. And the three Nazis, in fact, took care of their special rations, which will be required because the eating habits will be different during the Ramadan. Then the training schedules, that how they will train, etc., will be adjusted based on how the Ramadan is to be observed. Now, the religious sermons which will be given in the evening and the morning, they will be anti-Bolshevik, anti-Jewish jihad, which will come out loud. And then the imams were recruited so that they can take care that the soldiers are following the rituals and everything is fine. The halal food was prescribed, that they eat exactly what they are required to eat. It does not violate the religion. So what is interesting here is that Nazis are completely bending to appease the Muslims or the Muslims entirely. Nazis are generally like today when you talk of a dictator or when you talk about somebody getting very authoritarian, or you say that the person is very authoritative, you immediately take the example of Hitler, that he's becoming like an Hitler or something like that. But here you see the Nazis, or as in the people of the Hitler, are bending so much in front of a faith. And coming back to what atrocities these people did, they of course did an immense amount of atrocities against the Serbian civilians. They were butchered, massacred badly. The villages were ransacked, and they replicated exactly the 7th, 8th century, the war model, the jihad model. Their wars were more or less fought like that. So I would say that there were hundreds of thousands of Muslims which were recruited in the units, and they fought for the Nazis. And yes.
That was very interesting because Hitler's goal was to make a world that was Aryan, right? Just to white Aryan. And that's why he wanted to get rid of anybody who wasn't Aryan. Can you speak on how, he made a compromise with the Muslims, even though they were not Aryan, and how Iran, I think he once said, changed their name in order to fit Hitler's criteria and not be, taken over by him?
Oh, yes. And this was again a very fascinating part of my research when I was just going through the trajectory of Hitler's religious point of view, because they kept changing with the time. Of course, he grew up as a Catholic Christian. He was, in fact, too much inspired by Christianity in the initial days. And in the initial days, the whole German world was badly trapped into the anti-Jewish idea, anti-Semite, I would say, because for them, everybody, all the Semite were the problem. It was not just the Jews. For the Germans, right?
Mm.
Now, and there were a lot of pseudo-racial sciences which are popping up, and Jews were considered as a race entirely. And in fact, in 1919, Hitler, before he wrote his text or letter appeared, which he had written, where he expressed that why the Jews are the problem of the world. And it was very much inspired from the text of the protocols of the elders of the Zion, which is a great forgery, and it was even caught in 1921 by the time. Despite that, it continues to exist in the Arab world as a propaganda. But 1919, this forged text was used as a reference, and Hitler established that Jews are a race because they are very introvert-looking community, a community which marries within themselves, a community which does not go to do anything beyond their community. They are all within themselves. So that was a very pseudoscience level of thesis of the racial studies back then, which established that Jews were one race entirely. And that very race is the reason for all the problem in the world. Germany lost the battle in the World War One because of the Jews, and so on and on. There were enough written in that text. And of course, after that, his so-called evil magnus opus, Mein Kampf, appeared. But once he said that I am completely Christian, and he saw the Nazi movement to be very Christian in the initial days. But as the days passed on, he began to become very agnostic toward the religions, I would say. His faith in the religions began to wane away. And it so happens that the more and more authoritative a person becomes, the more and more at times his faith from the religion starts to get away, because he feels that, and we have a lot of stories in Hinduism too, which talks about that a person, the moment he wants to become more authoritative, he wants to envy the god, or in fact says the god does not exist. So that's how there are many tales also about it. So we see this happen with Hitler too, that he becomes very agnostic uh, to a large extent, if not very atheistic. Uh, uh, Around 1930, mid 1930s, he observes that there's a very important geopolitical relations which needs to be maintained by the Turks, which needs to be maintained by the Arab world, and which must be maintained by the Persians. And Persians, for the obvious, and one of the major reasons was the oil fields, etc., were playing a very important role. Now, the founder of the Pahlavi dynasty, the Shah, who founded the dynasty, he was very anti-Jewish, and in fact, he conducted many pogroms against the Jews, which is very well recorded in history, and he saw himself more to align with the views of Hitler or the Axis powers. And when the Nuremberg laws came, according to Nuremberg laws, the world was the whole Europe, or rather the world was divided into Aryans and non-Aryans. And taking ahead the anti-Semite philosophy of the German world, everybody, including the Persians, including the Arabs, including Jews, of course, everyone was considered as non-Aryan. And that's when the Shah says that we are the more Aryan than anybody else because our traditional name is Iran. And he thought of leveraging the past Indo-Iran relationship of the genetic and how they are connected, etc. The lot of civilizational foundational values which match, and it's a lot of similarity. He said that we are Iran, and so that's when the name of the Persia changes to Iran to get a leverage or get themselves away from the problematic Nuremberg laws. And he gave the leverage. Hitler gave the leverage to the Arabs too, because they were a very important ally, because they carried the maximum hatred for the Jews, what he could see fostering, and the maximum of what he could find. And that's when the Mein Kampf's Arabic editions were published. We see that the Arabs are pulled out from being the non-Aryans, and the Iranians, of course, get away because they already established that we are the pure Aryans, etc., etc. And this is quite fascinating, Daniel, because again, this speaks a lot about what Hitler was up to. The most authoritarian man who lived in that era choose to change the text, or rather his own words, his own views of philosophy, which he may not agree to entirely, but he choose to do so because he felt that this is the faith, these are the people who are fighting my battle, or perhaps we are the best of the alive when it comes to the ideology.
What would you say is the most disturbing or surprising thing you came across in the archives when you were researching?
There were quite a lot of them. One, the instance of the Farhud, which I already spoke about, when the coup was to happen and it failed, and all the weapons, etc., which were sent by Germans to the Iraqis, the Arabs, that was used to persecute the Jews. And for just a few days, they massacred so many. And in fact, if they would have been given enough days, as in what happened in Germany, perhaps would have outnumbered what the Germans did. So that was quite a very disturbing thing to observe. The other disturbing thing, what I observed was how the persecution of Jews systematically continued in the Arab world from 1920s. It continues 1930s, and that's when they finally thinks that think that we have to pick the arm in mid of the 1930s. And that's when a lot of Arab apologists also point to, and they say that it's the Jews who picked the weapons, and they began to kill the Arabs, and Arabs were just reciprocating. But the truth is entirely different, because the Jews just picked the weapons because the persecution had been so long in the Arab world, as in the Palestine, if I tell it very clearly. And the whole episode where the Arabs are coming to attack, and in one of the battle, in fact, Yasser Arafat was also part of that battle. He came as one of the fighters to attack one of the Jewish kibbutz, and that's when all the Jews come together. If I'm not wrong, the number was around 60 or 65, while there were many Arabs. They just came together and decided that we have to fight the battle because this is the battle for our survival. So when I was reading those passages, I was quite moved, because it also related the stories which appeared in India. The Kashmiri Pandit or Kashmiri Hindu genocide, which transpired in the early 1990s. And there's some other stories of the Mopla genocide. Then there's a story of Direct Action Day in India, in Calcutta. So we could feel the same emotion. Of course, I have not lived those days, neither in Calcutta nor in Kashmir, etc. But hearing the stories from, say, the colleagues who are around me, who have the family, who come from that lineage, they have told the stories. I have read them in the true accounts. And then when I was reading through that, how the Jews were preparing themselves to give a fight to the Arabs, and it was like, enough is enough. Now we have to do it. That was really a moving moment for me, though it was disturbing, that how unfortunate it was that they are the people who were the original inhabitants of the land. They were thrown out, and today they are trying to make a comeback, because everywhere else they are being persecuted. So they are just looking to return home, and at the home too they are facing the persecution, and they're still cuddling together, coming together to give a fight.
It's interesting because most people believe that the violence began after the state of Israel was created. But from what you're saying, this was happening decades before that, and it was never really about the creation of the state of Israel. It was about Jews, killing Jews. That's correct?
Yes, that's very true. In fact, if we start digging the history, it goes back to 7th century. Like, we have to be very unapologetic about stating the facts, because as in fact it is from the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad itself, when the tribes were persecuted, they were killed, and they were told to get converted, and there was alliance which was created, and the blame is made that they did not agree to the alliance with the Prophet, and then hence they were massacred, and the women and the children were taken as slaves, and all the men were massacred. So it starts from there, and it continues when the Umar establishes the pact, which is called as the Pact of Umar, or the Covenant of the Umar, where the dhimmi status is given to the non-Muslims. And one should go through the Pact of Umar to really know that what lies in the theology, why the Arabs behave the way they behave, why they always see the Jews as the arch enemy. So yes, people can say that it all began in 1948, after Israel really showed the way out to the Arab, and that also had a very strong reasons, because those Arabs who were living in the land of Israel, they had collaborated with the Arabs. They choose to side with the invading Arab armies. Of course, it was new state is created. And when a new state is created, you see that within the state, whom you are seeing as a potential citizens of the country, they themselves choose to ally with the first set of enemies who have invaded you once you have become a sovereign state. was bound to happen, but it did not happen there. It did not begin there. It began a lot earlier, 7th century, 8th century, 9th century, 10th century. It continued, and of course, it's not just about Islam. The Jews have been facing persecution since the Babylonian era, when the Assyrians persecuted them, and of course, it's the Cyrus the Great who built the temple for them. But those are the few anomalies. Largely, it has always been the story of persecution for the Jews.
Why do you think it is that this history is missing from the mainstream education and the media? Why do you think that this story isn't widely taught?
So I very strongly believe that somehow world has failed to understand what Islamism has to offer to it. They don't understand it at all. And um, to be very fair, it's that even Hindus don't understand it really well. And so goes with, of course, the Jews are way more aware because of the scenario and the circumstances in which this population lives. Even the population is lesser. But still, among the Jews also, they are the naysayers, and you would be very well aware of them, right? There are many who deny the existence of a threat from the Islamic world, which has been existing since ages. And when we tend to think that the other person in front of me has the same worldview as I own or as I hold, that's where the problem lies. A lion and a deer cannot drink water at the same bank. It can never be possible because the deer is sure to be eaten away by the lion if the deer does not makes a way out or does not come together to scare the tiger out or the lion out, which again is very tough to do. It's the very nature of the faith system, or say rather, if I put it if I take the example of the Palestinian cult itself, the death cult, the way it operates, the world does not understand it. Imagine that October 7 happened. And then I thought that because now it has gone to so worse. Now the world will realize, they will realize that what the problem is. But you would recall it also very well, Daniel, that it would be around 15 days down the line when the narrative began to change altogether. It was all pro-Israel initially because it was bound to be. You cannot. But after 15 days, they were the people who even began to deny that Hamas has done anything wrong, right? They were even justifying Hamas. So when you can find the justification for Hamas doing what it did on October 7th, right? These are the things of the archives which are drying up in the archives. The thing which is happening in front of us, that also is not being acknowledged by the people just because everybody is trying to become a better human being by praising some other Islamist. And that there lies the problem. And this problem continued so much, and these chapters of history never could surface in front of us. It always remained buried because we never collectively attempted to do it. Like say that you were doing something about the cause, I am doing something about the cause. But had there been so many people coming together to talk about it, things would have been different. Even though I have written this book, I'm sure that down the line after 10 years also, maybe that again somebody will ask, okay, did Al-Husseini really commit those crimes?
Why do you think it is that so many Indians feel a strong connection to Israel?
There's a very one strong reason is that we share the pain, and at times when you share the pain, it connects you the most. And see, one thing which is common between the Judaic faith system and Hinduism, or the Indic systems rather, is that we don't believe in forced conversion, right? That's how, and that was perhaps the reason why, in fact, the Jews also were always overpowered by the other faith system, which arose. It all emerged through the Judaism, but they tried to suppress the Judaism, the Jews, because they never saw Jews being the force who are going to come and do exactly what they are doing. And so when the persecution of the Jews began, say in the Assyrian period, in the Babylonian period, after that, the Roman pagans also took it up. And when the Jews came to India after the fall of the Second Temple, and we welcomed the Jews with open hand down there in the southern part of the country, because India is a very diverse land with a lot of tradition. Like Hinduism is a one word, but within the Hinduism, there's so many folds. Somebody worships Shiva, somebody will worship Vishnu, somebody would say that I am atheist, and it's very tough for people to believe that how within a faith system somebody can be. So there's so much of diversity which exists. So when the Jews came in here and when we heard the stories of the persecution, we always were like, okay, you can surely live in here. We are not going to persecute you because you are just one another addition to us. And interesting point is, we did not only give the place to the Jews, we gave the place to the Muslims too. We were very welcoming to them when they came down there in the south through the trade routes to trade, etc. We gave the place to the Christians too. But the point again remains, Daniel, is that the corollary which I gave you of the lion and the deer, right? The deer can welcome the lions or the predator, one who is going to eat. But is it a sustainable policy? That is for the people to figure out. But coming back to Indian quotient with the Israel, now in reciprocation, Israel has always been a great friend to India, whether it's India-China war or whether it was India-Pakistan war of 1965, 1971 war. Israel has always stood with us, though diplomatically our alliance only began in 1992, and India had not voted for Israel when the state of Israel was created. But despite that, what Israel remembered was the past that we never persecuted them. And this emotion can only be understood by those people who are persecuted. And what is the value of valuing somebody who does not persecute you? This is way beyond the diplomatic ties and the diplomacies and etc. which are done today. It's way more than that, whatever people may say, right? So this tie is always going to remain with us. India, Israel, I'm sure is going to be great collaborators even in the days to come. It's going to be amazing one, and they are two very good friends.
What do you think the world can learn from India in their treatment of Jews and how open they were and accepting they were?
So, as I was saying, Daniel, that the world needs to understand that India has definitely presented itself as a melting pot where a lot of tradition can thrive, a lot of ideas can thrive, which also happens because of the diversity in the geography. Because the moment you are up there in the north, while it's extreme cold, you can't live without really wearing a lot of tons of clothes, warm clothes. But when you come down to the south, the thing will be very different. The moment you go to central India, the geography and the geology of India itself has naturally made the country so diverse. So by default, the traditions become so diverse. Like traditions are nothing but the output of the geography and geology. It makes you do what the land is about, the eating habit, they become your tradition, etc. So fortunately, our geography has blessed us to be so diverse, and so we have been very welcoming. And the world needs to really learn it from us big time because India definitely is a civilization which is continuing since. It never ended. It never got a full stop. While the land of Israel also is a very continual civilization. If you look that way, it continued and continued and continued. Now, for India also, it has always been a continue, and it only existed, it could exist because everybody in India came together to fight the adversaries when it came to do something, and it always welcomed everybody. It never set a kind of a differentiator that you are somebody different, and until unless you do it, the world cannot become thriving one. World will always have a problem because all the nationalities which is outside India, say for example, the Spain was for the Spaniards, that the French was for the France was with the French. So it was always about a particular group for which it existed. But India offered a very different operating system altogether, and it welcomed everybody. And this is something which world should learn from. And yes.
After your book was published, you had an event, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he personally wrote you a letter and it was presented to you. What was that moment like for you personally?
That was quite a fascinating and overwhelming moment for me as a person, as an individual, because of course, a letter coming from a foreign prime minister is definitely a big thing. And that too, when it comes from somebody whom you see in a very high esteem. I do have a lot of regard for Mr. Netanyahu because, and in fact, this gesture speaks a lot about him than me. See, I am just one out of 130 crore people who has written a book in India, right? Of course, I understand that it's for the cause, it's for bringing the truth, but still, he chose to acknowledge it because this book was for his people. And a leader becomes a great leader only and only when he has this conviction to stand for his people, irrespective of which source it comes from. For, say, a minion like me, somebody sitting so distant, millions of thousands of kilometers away from him, wrote a book. The book was taken to him by the ambassador to India, and he presented a copy. And it was really a great gesture of him to realize that this book is for our people. So I must say a word to this man. He would have just ignored it if he would have wanted, and it would have made no difference. But I wouldn't see it as just a praise to me, but I would see it as something which is the conviction to do something for the own people, to stand for the own people. So he's ready to do even smallest of a gesture, which can really bring the cause of his own people wide and broad. So that's why I believe this is something which many leaders from other countries can learn from Mr. Netanyahu, that what it means to stand for own people. Because if each and every leader of each and every country or the state begin to stand for their people, there will be no problem in the world whatsoever.
How did the writing of this book personally change how you view Israel and this?
So I was quite clear with what the Palestine-Israel conflict is about, but I did not know that there was so much nuances of religious theology. I understood that, of course, I understood the importance of Dome of Rock. I knew about the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I knew that what Jerusalem has for the world, but I still did not know about so much of religious underpinning because I had never come across the Charter of Hamas. I had not read it. I had not come about the Palestinian leadership, what it thinks about its own people. I had not known about the national anthem of Palestine, which is Fidai, which literally means somebody who is there to sacrifice himself for the cause of jihad. So these things made me quite clear for one point that this battle between Israel and Palestine, or say rather the Hamas, which is today, is not about the land. It's about the religion, it's about civilization, it's about something which a lot of people feel that remain unfinished in 7th century, and it must be finished. And we already spoke about the reference of the Al-Banna, which you spoke about Al-Husseini, and how people see this cause of the annihilation of the Jews. And Israel can't drop the weapon, because if they drop the weapon, it means annihilation of the Jews altogether, and it means the finishing of the unfinished agenda or the final solution which awaits.
Maybe you can leave us with a final message. What do you hope people understand after reading your book that maybe they don't understand today?
So one thing I can say, Daniel, is the world needs to collectively create a movement, which I hope that it can happen if my book is read in mass, that Al-Husseini and other Palestinian leaders and the other leaders at least now notionally be declared as a war criminal through United Nations or some international forum. Some pressure must be created, some narrative must be created that way, so that at least even if those people are not living, our conscience don't fail us. Our conscience as the world don't fail us. We feel that we at least did the right thing, which should have happened around 80 years ago. At least it's happening today. And maybe that we can bring a peace to at least few of the Jewish soul who just fell prey to these evil people, and something may happen. And perhaps that can bring a full stop to the Israel-Palestine battle. Because what this will do, if at all, because I am being over ambitious and I am a bit too positive, but what I'm envisaging, or rather hoping, that people do understand that you have to stand with Israel, because that's the only legit thing what you can do as of now. There is no second way around. And Palestine, the Palestinian world, or the world which thrives there, is a death cult which will come to your doorstep too if you let Israel be defeated even for a single point.
Abbas, I want to thank you for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm going to put a link below for people to purchase the book. I know it's on Amazon, right? And I thank you for writing the book. Definitely a true gift to the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. It was all my pleasure discussing the thing with you. And as you said, it was really a pleasure for me conversing with you. And I look forward to have more conversation in future around the subject.
Thank you very much. If you have a 401k or an IRA, please listen. Gold is at record highs. What many people don't know is this: you can move part of your retirement money legally and without tax penalties into physical gold you actually own. Alpha Omega Gold helps you do this through a gold IRA. Your gold is real. It is stored safely. It is in your name. Learn more at ao.gold/stand. Alpha Omega Gold is our sponsor, and they proudly stand with Israel.